legislature, I'm going to give you a different perspective. And one of the problems you have in Doñana County is you're cut off from the rest of the state and you don't know what's happening. You have very powerful representatives already serving in the legislature. And so one of the problems in what you are seeing in Doñana County in particular is you have big needs. Albuquerque also has big needs. You know, it's just a different kind of need. And the problem we have in our state, as we are working especially on infrastructure issues, is we have huge geography. So those water systems really take a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of pipe. And so it looks like it's not being fairly distributed. And so I'm going to specifically address the capital outlay system. We can do ever so much better. I personally believe that in our state, we should not just distribute capital outlay based on your representation. Because I think there are bigger problems, and one of the problems I do think we need to deal with is the number of communities that do not have water systems, the number of communities that do not have electricity. And I think those are shared things, and I think if we talked about it, we would all say, you know, that's a pretty reasonable priority. But the way it is right now, you have absolutely no visibility of what is happening. So what I will tell you is that there was a lot of money put into some sewer systems in this community. Absolutely needed. Was it enough? It was not enough. But unless you can see what is going on in the rest of the state, you don't know that. But we can do better.
For the questioner, I have to tell you, one of the benefits of these forums is we, as candidates, and we all three happen to be from Albuquerque, we get input like this from you, and usually what people want to hear, so I'll tell you, is we won't forget you. I won't forget you when I'm your governor, when you come to Santa Fe. But I do have to tell you that this question comes from all corners of the state. There is concern everywhere outside of the Albuquerque-Santa Fe area about this exact issue. Are we getting our appropriate share of state funding? How is it being prioritized? And who decides if we get money? Who decides what it goes into? So you are not unique, and I'm sure you realize that. It's a huge state. You have lots of communities that send wealth to Santa Fe, and a lot of it stays in Santa Fe. It doesn't. Not only does it make it to Doñana County, it doesn't make it to all parts of the state. It goes to Santa Fe and never leaves. So it's a legitimate concern. It really is two parts. Whoever is the executive needs to understand your county, your region, and know your needs. And the second is, whoever is the executive needs to make sure when it comes to Santa Fe, it gets redistributed back out of Santa Fe. We're not going to do that until we downsize state government, employees, spending, capital, the whole works. And that will address that issue to some extent. Thank you.
This is for Judge.
My name is Mr. Arnett. I had an expectant mother, but unfortunately, back in September, I was married, and my husband and I went to hospital 5 hours while I was there, and the nurses did nothing. They literally came in and said, well, because you don't have insurance, you don't want to two options. Either, you go to a different state, and maybe they can do something for you, or you end up dying in the place. I want to know that if I go for one of you guys again, and I get pregnant, what can I have? But if I get pregnant again, and something happens, I know, what do they do?
My name is Mike Burson. I'm a PD person. The reason she asks that is because there's one thing that we've both noticed with the healthcare system in the county itself is that in terms of one, it sucks. I'm not gonna lie, guys, it totally sucks. Because when you have two full-time college students like myself and my wife, okay, it's very hard for us to get insurance, okay? Let alone apply for state Medicaid or, you know, food stamps for that matter. So what is it that you guys can do on a state level, okay, to ensure that, you know, whatever funding goes into Santa Fe or, you know, whatever trickles down here is distributed equally and fairly to people in our situation?
First off, I see your tears, and I'm so sorry to lose a baby, no matter when. My prayers, I am so sorry. And it is not, you know, I don't know what's going on in the southern part of the state, and someone wants just to tell you right now, I'm not sure what the answer is, but I have made an observation, and there is something wrong in Doña County, in Otero County, when citizens are being turned away from the emergency rooms. And it is not the first report that I have heard, but the results are as horrific. And in the rest of the state, you know, we are stretched and stressed medically, but mostly across the state, if there's an emergency situation like this family, you're not turned away for any reason. And so as your governor, the first thing is to take a call like this. I'm telling you that this is not the system that is set up. Why the response was so, I don't know, but I know we have to get to the bottom of it. And the thing that was really troubling the other day is I got another call from a lady from Tularosa who has kidney stones. She had a stent in her urethra and has a 4-month-old baby. And they told her that she needed to give up 6 months worth of the only money that she had if she wanted any care or she needed to go to another state. The answer is there are programs. Clearly, something is wrong here. And I would be glad to set you up with what is available at the next state university, but there are other programs in the state. And I am so sorry.
Let me just echo what Janice said about your personal circumstances. I'm also very sorry about anyone that has to go through that to you. I know it's very personal to you, very sad. So thank you for sharing those concerns. That's the way these kind of issues get brought to our attention. I know it's hard, but that's part of the purpose of this forum. And I like Janice, I'm not intimately familiar with emergency services in Doña County. I'm familiar with University of New Mexico Hospital. I would hope that I would do the same kind of story up there, but that doesn't help you at all, I understand. That's just that we put a lot of resources into that institution. I don't think it's disproportionate, but I do think there is a problem when we don't have that going on in a county this size. And really, we need these kind of services be distributed throughout the state. We have large regions. I think we need to get emergency medical care quickly. I was in Caddo County and saw their heliport they have, which is at the fringe of UNM's helicopter distance. So I know there are some arrangements for these kind of things. It sounds to me like they're inadequate. I'm glad you brought that to our attention, and I'm very sorry for your personal circumstances.
You know, I hear your story and I just get mad. We have one of the best healthcare systems in the world in this country. You know, I was born at University Hospital and my parents were on food stamps and they got care. This is 41 years ago. You know, our system is such that if you need care, you should be able to go into any hospital in the state and get it. And so, you know, the fact that we have incompetent people working in our medical industry says something about the state of affairs of government. Government that does not pay attention to what's going on in healthcare, government that allows people to sit around and provide you, or rather make sure you don't get the treatment you deserve, is unacceptable, period. It doesn't matter if someone says they don't have the funding. They are supposed to provide healthcare wherever you go in the state. We do have a crisis. We have a problem with rural healthcare delivery. We have a huge problem with medical malpractice insurance in this state. My brother's a doctor. He won't even come back to New Mexico because it's too costly for him to be here in New Mexico. But your experience should never, ever happen. And I swear to you, as governor, if that's the kind of thing that goes on, those people who are responsible will pay for it, whether it be going to jail or some other mechanism, because you must get the health care that you deserve. And I promise you that will not happen.
I'd just like for you, Bree, to just give me an example. I'll give you a couple of current issues. Number one, governor's the most economic, politically corrupt individual in the nation. Number two, health care workers like myself are very crucial to providing care that need it. Third, having worked in healthcare, tested officials, drug screens, police officers undercover, truck drivers, what happens with the idea to fix the quote-unquote epidemic by our outgoing FBI in Albuquerque about corruption in Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, and any. I just want examples of how you can solve it on the spot drug testing for everybody in the House, Senate, anybody in the hospital. I just want to share examples. I just want some ideas out of that.
Well, one example which is shared widely on in these forums is, as you are probably aware, sir, and most of you, we have an extremely high number of political appointees throughout the state of New Mexico, put in place by the governor, and no one really knows where they are, who they are, or what they do. But what they do is they implement this culture of corruption. That's how it is. It comes from the top down to the lower levels, to the levels you're talking about, whether they be in healthcare, whether they be in law enforcement, whether they be in other activities that affect all of your lives. That is how this corruption is implemented. It is through those political appointees who oversee, probably people like you in your past, sir. I don't think you're a healthcare worker, I don't think you are anymore, but people like you who are state employees who've gone to work, do their job, know what they're supposed to do, and then in the last 8 years they've had a political appointee sitting in an office in their facility or that they report to politicize every decision that usually should be made by an employee who follows the rules, who reads the guidebook, helps the customer. Instead, we have politicized all of those activities. Getting rid of all of those employees immediately is the first step to ending that culture of corruption where the top level of our state is basically operates on cronyism and patronage. Thank you.
How many of you actually believe the corruption that we've seen in the last few years is something new in New Mexico? I think this has been going on for 100 years.
Turn your mic on.
It is on. Hello. For 100 years. And what it seems to me is that every once in a while we do get an honest government where we don't have the FBI or the Attorney General of New York investigating or uncovering corruption in New Mexico, and then we fall back into what we've seen over the last 7 years. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that someone has to be responsible. And that someone in this state should be the governor. We have a governor right now who is not responsible. He allows the appearance of impropriety in many state agencies from top to bottom. And quite honestly, the appearance of impropriety is just as bad as the impropriety itself. When you were convinced that your government might actually be corrupt, it probably is corrupt. My view is that the fish stinks from the head down. We've got a governor who doesn't remember meetings where he made decisions where his friends were getting paid off. And we have a lieutenant governor who is prepared to sit by for 7 years And only now, when she's running for governor, to say, man, we got a corrupt state and we better do something about it. This is very clear. We get an honest governor. We get an honest governor.
Can you hear me now? Whoops, there you go. Well, you know, I've had a front row seat, and to say that it is corrupt is certainly an understatement. So let me start back with what I would do differently. It's a mindset. You know, I think that if you are working for state government, if you are elected, you should be satisfied with the salary that you receive, just to begin with. I also believe that if you are going to work in government and you are going to receive an appointment, you should be competent to do the job. Well, I just described two things that did not happen in the entire 8 years that I have served. So let me just tell you what I got this weekend. I was up in Clayton and Cimarron in 3 different locations. I was asked exactly the same question. When you are governor, and we need to talk with you about the construction industry's division, will it cost us $4,000 to get 10 minutes of your time? 4 different places, 3 different places. You know, that's just wrong. That's just wrong. You know, and as your governor, that is not how I will operate. If you choose to, if you work for me and you operate that way, you're fired. Because you know what? It's your government, and you should not ever be hijacked, ever. And the truth is since 2003, if you wanted to see the governor, it came with a cost. You better have a checkbook. You know, we just have to change the mindset. We have great state workers. They are tired of being bullied. They are tired of being compromised. We're going to change it.
Almost like a 4-part thing there.
Okay, we're ready.
Doug, this one's yours
I'm
first.
glad you all Republicans, because this is really for you guys. As a voter, I'm really tired of hearing one thing in the campaign and getting another. So I'd like you to address the following topics. National health care, cap and tax, the wilderness issue for us here in New Mexico, and immigration. Not necessarily in order. And I know others will probably have questions in this regard. But if you would just give us your honest opinions on how you feel about those topics.
Can you be more specific on what part of the wilderness issue you're talking about?
Actually, war, security.
Okay. All right. We got it. I
Can
will. All right. Ready? I can do it. I can do it.
Let's take a piece, break it into 2 pieces. Let's do cap and tax and healthcare first, and then we'll come back to the other 2 issues, okay?
All right. So first thing on the cap and tax, cap and trade, you know, the nation opposed this back last August, and Washington heard it, then moved on to something else that was equally as bad, which was the national health care bill. Our governor here in New Mexico, on his own, without the legislature, is attempting to enact a New Mexico-only cap and trade bill, cap and tax bill. Now, I think that is completely wrong, aside from the fact that I don't agree with that piece of that effort. He's trying to do it without the legislature. And so 3 weeks ago, I, as an individual, actually went and filed a temporary restraining order against the governor to stop him from doing it. So you have my word, that's not something that I'll push as governor. With respect to national health care, the health care bill, I can't even begin to tell you how depressed I was watching that vote in the House. You know, my argument is if this was such a great bill, why on earth did Nancy Pelosi have to bribe so many members of Congress to get their votes? I'm a small business person, and the bill as it stands today is a disincentive for me to continue providing health care to my employees. All of you who are small business people are in the same boat. I have committed to join other states in opposition to this bill. My biggest fear for the state is the long-term cost of providing health care. By 2014, we're going to have to bear a larger and larger portion of federal health care costs. And I am totally against that, and I promise you I'll fight against it.
The health care bill that was just passed, first off, let me just go back. Would you all vote for something that Nancy Pelosi says you'll know what's in it after we pass it? No. As a legislator, I was so offended. But for our state, if this bill is fully implemented, the cost per year will be an additional $880 million. By the way, we are $600 million short on the budget, and I assure you in August we're going to go back in for a special session. This is on top of. Not only will you be driving small businesses away from providing medical care, but there is no place to go. And one of the things that has happened in our state, and I'll just throw this out for you to think about, it is the 3-to-1 match in Medicare and Medicaid. And you know what? They're holding us hostage. Do you know if it would be better if we gave up the 3-to-1 match and actually determined our own future? You know, we might actually have better health care. We could look at tort reform, and we could look at medical malpractice, and we could look at making sure that we were incentivizing the docs and the physician's assistants and the nurses that are getting out of college. Instead, they're leaving our state. I think that we need to take destiny into our own hands and let the federal government do their thing. I was a little bit discouraged. I signed on to a letter with all of my colleagues in the House of Representatives asking the AG to join the lawsuit, and I got a note that said today, well, you know, interest in this is waning. Excuse me.
Sir, thank you for those questions. It's kind of like throwing red meat to the wolves to ask those two questions. At least the way I look at it, the national health care issue is obviously, in pieces, it's very troubling. It will cost the state an absolute fortune that we can't possibly pay. But in the large sense, it threatens to change the face of America. It threatens to have such broad sweeping implications. It will actually, and it's part of a design, and we've seen other pieces of that before that at a national level. It's part of a design to really change some of the fundamental underpinnings of America, which are free enterprise and personal responsibility and competition and choice. So in a very large sense, and I think the biggest outpouring I've seen is immediately after that health care bill was passed, as far as public concern. And I hope it stays at the level it is, doesn't diminish at all, because it will have a dramatic effect. It will creep in, and then it will, before we know it, we will have these enormous changes. On capital tax, that's equally as troublesome. It is an enormous waste for the United States to move in that direction. It would be horrible economically. It's not justified scientifically, and it had none of the basic fundamental tenets to support it have been established. So I'm totally against it, and the state should not be a target and an example of that, and neither should the country.
The other two were immigration, and especially how it's being dealt with now in Arizona, and wilderness space.
First off, I'm grateful for what Arizona did. I'm grateful for what Governor Brewer did. Being the legislator that I am, the first thing I did was read the bill. And you know what I'd like to tell you? I know it's a novel concept, isn't it? I'd like to tell you that we could simply lift Arizona's bill and put it in New Mexico, but we can't. The reason we can't? Arizona does not give driver's licenses to undocumented illegal immigrants. They implement and enforce the use of the I-9 E-Verify program for employers. We do not. If you want to make sure that your state is safe and that we have border security, we can be very much like Arizona, because all they have done is actually put into place under the trespass codes, the federal law. That's all they did. That's all they did. And there's other interesting parts. But I think that if we're not serious about border security and immigration, and also how do we deal with workers? We do have a worker issue. It's a federal problem. But you know what? I'm tired of waiting for the feds. And so if I'm governor, we're going to figure out a way to get this done. We need the work, but we need to know that you're not a narco-trafficker and that you're going to shoot our citizens. That's what we need to know.
Janice didn't get to the wilderness issue, so maybe I'll start with that. And it's actually tied together because I think we talked about it in the sense of border security. So, securing our borders is unfortunately becoming the job of the state of New Mexico, and as chief executive officer, it becomes the governor's job. That is crystal clear when Arizona has to take action like it did, and when the borders are sitting up against these violent communities and pushing over criminals and jeopardizing safety of citizens of New Mexico. Of course, U.S. citizens, but the U.S. government's not doing their job, so the New Mexico government, through the governor, needs to secure our border. That means the governor needs to take a position against creating wilderness along the border that will inhibit the ability of the state to protect its border, and probably inhibit the ability of the federal government when they finally do get around to doing what they're supposed to do and protecting that border. We will have, and we know in this country, once you get a wilderness area, you don't set it aside. So once that becomes wilderness, whether it's state or federal, no matter what the problems are, we will not set it aside. So you have to stop that before it takes place. That's the history of wilderness areas in this country. It won't change. The state needs to protect its border, needs to not become a magnet for immigrants from Mexico, illegal immigrants from Mexico or Arizona. And in order to do that, I'm serious. We are becoming a demagnet along the border because we're the vacuum. We have the most lax enforcement, the most checkerboard enforcement. We need standardized enforcement. We need training to implement that to protect our citizens as the first order of business of the governor. Thank you.
I agree with Pete when it comes to, with respect to creation of wilderness areas along the border. I think that's a no-brainer. We have almost 100 National Guardsmen involved in border security right now. They're ostensibly there to be supporting what the federal government is doing. They're not allowed to actually have bullets in their guns. So anyone who is a gun owner, they're the ones who are at risk from these cartels who are moving across the border, because what's the point of having a gun if you don't have any ammunition?
Can't even pop them over the head.
Very well, that's right. I have personal experience. A couple of years ago in Albuquerque, I came home from work and a guy broke into my car while I was inside. My wife screamed. I came out. He took off down the street carrying my stereo and some CDs, and I was furious. And I chased after him. And I tackled him in the street about 3 blocks away. And the police showed up and they said, "What on earth are you doing?" And after calming them down a little bit, they said, "Do you want to press charges?" And I said, "Absolutely." They said, "Why bother? We're going to turn him over to the INS. They're going to ship him back to Mexico, and they'll probably be back in your neighborhood next week." That is a snapshot of the problem that we have here. Everything from the legal IDs for illegal aliens, to the failure of our border security system in this country and certainly in this state. I'm a strong supporter of what they've done in Arizona. I think we can actually make it a lot tighter and provide more protections for law enforcement, but we have got to do something now, and we've got to work with the federal government in every state in this country to have a consistent policy to protect our country and our states.
Stop the wilderness bill from going through as the governor of this state.
seriously.
As governor on a federal public lands issue, the governor has several options. One of them is to educate and develop information that we would use and try to force our legislators to use to defeat the bill. We are entitled to develop a plan from the state as to how the state views that asset. We haven't done that in the past. That's in federal law. We developed state resource management plans. And I've said this in other forms, I'm glad we haven't done that under this administration because we'd be stuck with it. But if we do it in the next administration, I think it will be a multiple use plan that also includes issues like security and also includes issues like economics. And has clear, as best accurate as we can, information about the economic cost and lost opportunities by forming wilderness areas. So that's a major tool the state of New Mexico needs to develop so they can use and use to oppose wilderness legislation. And there are rights to litigate after that legislation comes in. They're pretty limited, so you need to take your action up front. You need to be out front with information, out front with plans or other legal tools that are available to either block, slow down, limit, or redirect the Wilderness Act that you're talking about.
I agree with Pete, but I think the question speaks to a much larger issue that we are dealing with in this state, certainly in many states across the country, but in western states, is the increasing encroachment of the federal government on our rights in New Mexico, our rights as citizens in this country. So you look at the health care bill, you look at a whole series of unfunded mandates that are rammed down our throats as citizens. You look at efforts to curtail Second Amendment rights in this country, and the wilderness bill, the wilderness issue is just one more example of that. So what can a governor do? Well, the governor has, a unique bully pulpit, and can go to Washington and fight for those rights that we believe are our own, not the federal government's to determine. You know, in 1994, we elected 34 Republican governors in this country, and they went to Washington and they told Bill Clinton that we've had enough, we want more authority and more power in the states. And since September 11th, all of those powers have been slowly creeping back to Washington, D.C. And this has not been just a Democrat creep, it's been Republicans as well. And what we need now is we need to elect conservatives, we need to elect people who believe in states' rights, not only in the governor's office, but in Congress, to go back to Washington and say no again.
Both Pete and Doug have hit it on the head, so let me give you another piece that's missing. This is a federal taking. It impacts the welfare of the state. Do you know that one of the reasons we have the tax structure we have is because there is so much federal land in our state. It is not on the tax rolls. Every time we build a train or we do a wilderness area, that land comes off the tax rolls. You know, I know that sounds like it's not important, but it alters the face of the state. So here's what I would do as governor. I would hire my friend Doug here because I'm really good PR guy, because you're going to have to do a lot of PR. And so we have to work the congressional delegation. We have to work the legislature in the state of New Mexico, but you don't have to stop there. We have a number of associations in western states that would actually help us take this fight, because we are not alone. There are 13 western states that the federal government is simply walking in and taking their land, taking it off the tax rolls. And I believe that, you know, Doug is correct, that when the governors came together, that was important. But we not only need the governors, we're going to need the legislators too. And so we need to wage a very specific PR campaign to make sure the representatives understand what the issue is. And I want to underscore the fact that you have so much federal land impacts the health and welfare of our state from a revenue picture.
As a Hispanic staunch yes or no on whether or not, as governor, you would pass that here in New Mexico, and how you would have kind of made it clear to us that, because we have a very big population of Hispanics here in New Mexico, how you would have kind of made us feel as if it wasn't at us and for us. For us rather than at us.
Doug, you're first.
Well, you know, I don't think that the bill in Arizona is designed to sort of create some racial profiling activity. I think it's a response to extreme frustration at the failure of the federal government to do what it's supposed to do along our borders. You know, we've had this problem that moved from California into Arizona. California acted with Prop 187. Arizona's got this bill, and it will continue moving across our borders unless we do something about it. I'm not an advocate of racial profiling, and certainly any bill that we pass in New Mexico has to protect the constitutional rights of our citizens. However, any bill that we pass here must give law enforcement the appropriate tools to do their job. And right now, they don't have those tools. I mentioned that our National Guard doesn't even have bullets in their guns. We have sanctuary policies around the state that prevent state police and law enforcement from engaging those kinds of activities. The simple fact of the matter is the Arizona law made illegal being illegal in this country. I have never been to another country in the world where I can go and get a legal ID. So, I'm a native New Mexican myself, sympathetic to any of those concerns, but I promise you that any bill that we end up here would respect those concerns.
This is a national security issue, and it grieves me that we would pick on any sector of our population. And so I think the first answer to the question is implementation. It has to be fair across the board. When we're talking about the Arizona law, let me just give you a couple of examples. If you are legally in this country, legally in this state, and you have a broken tail light and you are stopped, tell me the first two questions you're going to be asked. And registration. If you don't have those two things, don't you think there is reason to ask the next question? And so the point is are you being fair and equitable and treating everybody the same regardless of the stop? And I think that's partly the point. And so if we are profiling or making one sector of our population feel as if they have been targeted, then I think we have some really significant communications issues in addition to implementation. And so, that would be the first place that I'd go. So I want to just go back just very quickly and just remind you about how the driver's licenses came about in our state and another thing we can do to fix it. So I was there, and the argument was the reason that we will give driver's licenses to illegals is so they would buy insurance. Now the problem is, from the state level, is there is nobody following up after the 30-day insurance lapses. Nobody follows up. So, and I don't know if that is reverse racial profiling in some ways, but I think it is a matter of mindset yet again. And I think you probably want to be safe as well.
I'm not in favor of racial profiling, but I don't think, I agree that Arizona law doesn't call out for racial profiling. There's a part of that law that makes it very clear that there is a standard protocol followed by Arizona law enforcement. That when someone is arrested, they are asked for a driver's license. If they have a driver's license from a state that requires some proof that you're legal in that state for that driver's license, then they accept it at face value. And that's it, that's the end of the story. If you don't have that, they go on with a series of questions. That's not too different than some counties in New Mexico. Bernalillo County, for example, pretty much follows that routine. But the city of Albuquerque doesn't. So we have checkerboard policies in the state of New Mexico, where some jurisdictions follow up with questions regarding whether you are documented or not, and others don't. What Arizona said is we wanted to have a standard policy. So that part of the Arizona law, thing that needs to go along with it, Janice calls it implementation, I would call it training, because Bernalillo County trains their officers how to ask those questions. The Immigration Service trains their officers how to ask those questions, so they do not threaten documented U.S. citizens or documented illegals that are in the U.S. So we need to be sure we have training along with standardized law enforcement tools, and I think both of those are based on fundamental concerns regarding security.
Hi. All throughout the country, New Mexico isn't really an exception. The corrections system is growing, and the criminal justice system is growing a lot. And state legislatures keep ratcheting up the penalties and what constitutes a crime and sentences. And we want to get tough on crime, and that's good, but we can't pay for it. Our state is broke, and states keep passing laws that get tougher on crime. How are you going to solve it? Our prisons are overcrowded. Our parole and probation officers are overworked, and it's a problem. And all throughout the country, what are we need to do about it as a government?
That was an interesting question, but it's not quite right. And I ask these questions too. So today, right now, in our state prison system, there are 500 empty beds. How on earth do you explain that? How is it that we have these 500 empty beds, but our county and city jails are overflowing? Therein lies the problem. And what you've brought up is multiple layers, so it's a very good question. So first off, we need to enforce the laws that we have on the books. So now I have to talk about the judiciary. If the judiciary fails to do its job, then we're not safe. If they do their job, we may have overcrowding. Unfortunately, I have to tell you, I don't think we're doing the job. Now, when we're talking at the local level, I'm going to trust Pete's going to jump in here because he's an attorney, and there is a separation between what is a local crime, local penalty versus a state penalty. But what I am seeing, and what is happening today because we are broke, is we are letting people out of prisons, and the prison beds are empty. So could we look at maybe the Arizona model? I know some people like the Sheriff Arpaio. They like what he's doing. But I guess at the end of the day, as your governor, the one thing that I look at for laws is they have to be enforced. Otherwise, they just don't mean anything. If you are taking somebody's liberty and somebody's right, and we've said that is against the law, then I have to hold you to account that it's against the law and there's going to be a consequence.
I've heard corrections department related questions similar to this as I've traveled the state. And I think one of the concerns that underlies your question, I may be wrong, but I think it is that our correction system is broken. And people that are sentenced to crimes are not given treatment when that's appropriate. They're not given training so that when they leave the correction system, they have a decent chance that they don't come back. And those two things, I think treatment and training, are at the heart of a functional correction system. Because otherwise, you continue to have these prison population problems because you are seeing people just come back, recycle back through the system. They break the law, they're punished, but they're not given any tools in the correction facilities to help them not break the laws again. And I think we need to be very careful, and we have a history of very poor quality prisons in the state. And I think that history is continuing. And I think an effort needs to be made to upgrade our prison systems so that when people are sentenced, they get the appropriate sentence, but they are not punished while they are in prison by being associated with people much more violent, or they're not receiving the treatment that they need. Because ultimately, that adds to the cost of the system. It adds to our social costs when they're out, it adds criminal costs to people that are victims, and it creates more prisoners. So I would look towards those concerns that I've heard expressed over and over again and try to address those in our correction system.
Anybody here in corrections? So we were sitting around the campaign office the other day talking about this whole immigration issue and what you do with folks like the guy who broke into my car. And someone says, well, why can't we put him in prison and then mention the whole, Joe Arpaio, get these guys to work? And I said, well, wait a minute. We actually put our own people to work in prison. And we called the former Secretary of Corrections, who had once tried to get inmates at the penitentiary to crush a giant pile of rocks. I don't know if you remember that. And the answer was not much. I'm sure there are problems with our prison system. I do believe that we need to put people to work in prison to certainly offset some of the costs that they incur on the taxpayer, whether that be road work or ditches. I don't believe we have that system, and if I'm wrong, I look forward to being corrected. But I also think there are parts of our judiciary and prison system which are broken, and I look at things like DWI. DWI is a hot potato. The judiciary tends to drop the ball 10 ways to Tuesday, and we get guys with 10, 15, 20 DWIs driving around and killing people. And we have the judiciary, which loses paperwork. And how is it that that can happen? I think that we have to lock those people up. If it costs a little more, that's fine. They ought to pay for their own ignition locks, and they ought to pay for their own incarceration. But I think there are things we can do. I do believe in treatment and training, but I may be a little bit less of a softie. Nothing or softie.
Bill Colton, I heard your stance and observations about the border and immigration. If you're elected, what will you do to prevent people from coming into New Mexico illegally and once they're here? It's a very, very serious issue, and I think it's being taken too lightly. Once you're elected, what will you do as soon as you're elected? What are your actions?
That's a great question. But what the governor can do immediately is send state National Guards to the border. There will be some limitations unless we get cooperative agreements with the federal government. There will be an expense unless we get cooperative agreements and authorization from the federal government. But we need to be prepared to pay for our National Guard as a state and then fight with the federal government later about the costs. So we need to send National Guards to the border. We need to rescind the executive order where state police, which are under the governor's control, are not allowed to inquire into the documentation status of people that the state police arrest. And that would be immediate, and the governor can do that immediately. In order to require a driver's license, the governor will have to work with the legislature. I think a coalition can be built. There is enough pressure now, there is enough evidence and concern of criminal activity that we will be able to turn the driver's license bill around in the session, but it will require the legislature to help. So those are three of the top priorities right away that the governor would and can take action on.
I agree with Pete on all those issues. Sadly, this is a federal issue, and I say that not because I don't think we should take significant responsibility, but we have two problems. One is a set of immigrants who are coming into this country and they're working, and they're coming into New Mexico, getting their legal driver's license, and then fanning out across this country. The other one is the population of people who are here conducting serious crime. We used to have a program in New Mexico called the Cruces program, which allowed people to come into this country, work in the agriculture industries, dairy, chili peppers, whatever. We knew who was here. They paid a portion of their wages in taxes, and then we knew when they left. And I think we have to go back and look at those programs. There are industries here that program worked very well for, and it helped us manage who was here. The criminal activity, I think we can do more, and I think we need to push the federal government to do more of what they're doing in other states. I read the other day that we actually have 3 Predator drones right now that we can kill a terrorist in Afghanistan from a trailer in Socorro. We ought to be able to do more. Excuse me?
You need bullets.
We need bullets. We need to have obviously that capability, but I think there are technologies that we need to employ to better secure our border, and we need to push the federal government through. We can't deploy predators as a state, but we can change all the laws and work to change all the laws that Pete's talking about.
You know, this is a serious question, and I keep getting off track because the security, the national security component actually goes both ways. Not only what is coming into our state, but what has gone through New Mexico, out through Mexico to another country. Curl your hair if you have one, because it's very serious. So, I believe first and foremost in locking down the border. I think you have to have a secure border. There's lots of technological ways to do it, but you have to have the will to actually close the border. You know, when you go to another country, we don't treat it like we do here. It's very laid back, laissez-faire. You know, this is serious stuff. Again, following the laws. But there are a couple of other things that we've got to talk about, and you are right, this is not a simple issue. And so let's talk about illegals who are here who have their child in this country. Now, by all of our current laws, that child is a U.S. citizen. You know, the other term is anchor baby. What are we going to do? Now, I could make an argument that we need more babies. I'll tell you what, we don't have enough children in our country. But do you want to split families? Okay, so how are we going to do that? And I'm going to pose that question back to you because that's by far the hardest question that there is. Now, there is another way to approach this. One of the things that bothers me about the number of illegals and undocumented in the state of New Mexico across the board is how much money is being shipped out of our state. And I think we actually have to look at what do we do to stem the tide of shipping money out of the country.
I'm Harvey Baldwin. I would like to know what you will do with the power granted to you by the Constitution of the State of New Mexico, Article 18.
You know what? I don't know how many forums that we've done so far, but every few forums someone throws me a zinger. And I will claim ignorance. I don't know what you're referencing to.
I'm referencing the Constitution of the State of New Mexico, what you are trying to run, and if you don't know the rules, how are you going to do it?
Well, I understand what you're referring to. I don't know what specifically Article 18 is, and that's what I'm asking you.
Article 18, do any of you know what Article 18 is?
I give you Article 4, Section 16. It's real important to me, but I don't remember Article 18 either. I just don't remember. Would you help us?
Yes, Article 18 makes you the Commander-in-Chief of the National Guard.
Well, we've already talked about putting National Guard troops on the border. They're already there now. They're already somewhere around 100. There's been about 70 since last fall. And with respect to immigration, that's certainly something you want to keep up. You know, there have been instances in this country where governors have said no to the federal government moving their National Guard's troops outside of the United States. If you look in, I believe, Idaho, said no to sending them to Iraq. If we need them here more than they are needed elsewhere, I'd certainly support that as well.
There are 3 or 5 articles in that Constitution, and I appreciate you reminding us which one that is. But you know, the National Guard was designed to do a number of different things. But it is your largest force for first response in disasters. That is why we have a National Guard. Its second purpose was to defend. And if you look at many of our wildfires, many of our floods, the first people on the scene were your National Guard. They were your citizen soldiers, and I'm so grateful. And so I would be just like Doug. Before we release them to do another service for the country, I'm going to look, you know, does our state need that more than our country does? And please know that I believe in supporting our country. But the governor's job is to take care and protect the state of New Mexico, first and foremost. And that's my criteria for deploying the National Guard.
Thank you for pointing out that clause. I don't have the New Mexico Constitution memorized. I usually bring it with me, but I didn't bring it on this trip. So I didn't have a chance to look it up and look intelligent here. So, or prepared or something like that. But I would concur with both these candidates state. And I will say emergency response is becoming more complex and more important as society gets more complex and grows. And natural disasters and man-made disasters are becoming really a scientific art and skill how to deal with those. And so to have trained and equipped National Guard to deal with emergency response is a critical function of any state. It's expected that any state will have that. It's the governor's responsibility to make sure the National Guard is funded and trained and prepared and capable of dealing with emergency response. People expect it, and we need to have it, and the governor's job is to assure that. And I won't go on about the border, I've already talked about that.
This gentleman in the very back.
Point. You may be commander-in-chief of the National Guard, but all the President of the United States got to do is act. It's called the National Guard up for active duty. George Wallace found that out many years ago.
Mr. Huff.
I'm native to Mexican and in the automotive industry. One thing that really concerns me is the oil reserves and the gas reserves and the mineral reserves that we've got in the state of Mexico. As a governor, what would you do to allow them to start drilling for oil wells and gas wells and let's use our natural resources that we've got? They've been stopped on. And then also the wilderness area is affected in the same thing. Like y'all say, the wilderness area is a more of a complex deal, and it affects us in more ways than just border security, locking lands up. It also expands growth, curtails growth, and it also stops the drilling and exploration of both water, oil, and gas. So we need to get rid of the bit tax. What do y'all feel about that?
Janice is here.
It's a great question, and allows me to talk about some things that have me very concerned. So, the pit rule in and of itself has caused the cost of production to go up in our state. Now we have another problem that is affecting our natural gas industry. Natural gas can now be extracted from New York, Pennsylvania, and Alabama at $1.35 an MCF. Because of the pit rule, the best our guys are doing is $2.75, and they have to do transportation. Let me just put this in context for you. Oil and natural gas has provided between 20 and 40% of all the revenue for the state budget. We are in so much trouble, but because of competition, we may not get that one piece of natural gas. Now I want to go back and talk about cap and trade because this is all kind of hooked together. The cap and trade bill, in my opinion, is meant to drive oil and gas out of the state. Just hands down. That's what I believe it's supposed to do. We're going to fund some middle people. But we're also lacking one thing that you are being sold, which really bothers me. Wind and solar both require rare metals. I like wind and solar just fine. Where are we mining those rare metals right now?
China.
But we have it right here. Why are we not mining those rare metals? It is part of our natural resource. If we are so hell-bent on having a green economy which isn't quite ready to go, why would we actually undo the very work we were trying to do? So I say we need to open it up.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to address just mining for just a second. We passed a mining act. We were the last Western state to pass a mining act, and it's the strictest and the worst mining act in the Western United States. Since then, we haven't opened even a substantial mine in the United States, in New Mexico. Even though we have reserves, we have the largest uranium reserve in North America, we've made virtually no progress, even though the price of uranium has has come back to an economic point. It's kind of the opposite of the natural gas scenario. Uranium is now valuable and it's worth mining, and we have a mining act that doesn't allow us to access it. Most of our minerals in this state are owned by the federal government. The federal government has rules that are pretty strict to get to them, and then what the state does is put rules on top of those that are even more strict. That is a deliberate policy of this administration to hinder mining in New Mexico. There's no question about it. It's done through regulation and policy and implementation of this mining act. If we want to have mining in New Mexico, and uranium could provide a huge amount of revenue to the state of New Mexico and jobs, if we want to have that, we have to take a look at the State Mining Act and make it match the federal law, or let the federal law take care of it. So for mining, we are not going to mine in this state unless we change the state law and the regulations that go with it. And I would seek to do that and be a leader in doing that as you go.
Quick response, obviously the current amendment to the PIP rule has been extremely damaging to the industry. You go up to Farmington, you go down to southeast part of the state, and oil field services companies are in trouble. They're doing more work in Texas and Wyoming, in Spain. Some of our biggest oil and gas companies are investing even outside the United States. And that's had a huge and detrimental impact on public education funds, because they fund a good 50% of that cost in the state. Mining, what Pete said about mining is absolutely accurate. We have traditional industries in this state that have driven our economy for decades, for 100 years. Oil, gas, mining, agriculture, dairy. All of these industries have been regulated to death. We used to be number 4, I believe, in dairy production. We're number 9 because the Environment Department effectively terrorizes the dairy industry. The OCD and the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Directorate makes it very difficult for mining and for the oil and gas industry. This has to change. Government must be an advocate for industry rather than an adversary for industry. Across the board, we need a regulatory environment that allows companies to create jobs and create wealth, not go out of business. And that's what's been happening, and I commit to changing.
We talk a lot about sort of affirmative things that government can do for us. Okay, we can pass this regulation, we can pass that regulation, we can do this, we can do the other. I want to know, what are you going to do to leave us alone? The question is, there are all these regulations that can be added. I want to know what regulations you're going to get rid of. So the first thing I want to know is, give me 3 or a half dozen major rules and regulations that you would repeal or seek to repeal, and I understand the executive can do it. Then the second question is, you've been talking a lot about the federal government does this, the federal government does that. Well, what are you going to do to stand up for 10th Amendment rights? And what is the role of the governor in resisting federalization is fine, the problem is nationalization. So what's the role of the governor in resisting nationalization, and what are you willing to do?
Let me talk about the regulations first. And I don't know if we were talking about increasing a lot of regulations. Maybe it sounded that way, but I didn't hear any of us advocating new regulations. But I will say, just to be a little more precise, so the Mining Act and its regulations need to be substantially revised and simplified. That's one area. Second, the pit rule needs to be eliminated. Excuse me, that's a second area. Third, we have a broad law that governs all groundwater in New Mexico. And so it applies across industry. It applies to local wastewater plants. That's how they're essentially terrorizing the dairies, as Doug called it. That law and that set of regulations, so it's the New Mexico Water Quality Act and water quality regulations, those are outdated. Those are 30 years old. They are based on archaic formulas that most states don't apply anymore. They need to be simplified, and the numeric standards in there need to be replaced with risk-based standards that basically say we are not going to force money to be spent to reach a numerical standard unless there's some basis for it. We are spending an absolute fortune chasing numbers that we can't reach and that don't provide any health benefit or environmental benefit. So those are three major areas. And then, I know you had another question, but I'll wait on that one. The 10th Amendment one, sir. So let me answer that next, after this round, if you don't mind.
I agree with Pete. I mean, I tend to believe that the government that governs least governs best. And so if it sounds like I'm advocating more regulation, I apologize. Everything that I've actually talking about has to do with getting rid of policy, getting rid of regulation. You know, I think we can get rid of the pit rule. There's a process. I'm certainly opposed to any efforts to impose a cap on trade in New Mexico, but it's bigger than that. You know, we have new state agencies that have been created in the last 7 years. And we have duplicative services that cost the taxpayer a fortune. We have 2 education departments, higher ed and public ed. We have 2 public safety departments, public safety and homeland security. All these things came from the same place. So I commit to reducing the number of state agencies and working with the legislature to do it, reducing the cost on the taxpayer. And you can probably go through every single agency in the state. You look at state public education. The rules that are being put out on local communities around the state are killing education in New Mexico. And so I believe in fewer regulations coming from public education department. I mean, I believe in vouchers. I believe in term limits. I believe in a whole series of areas in government where government should be smaller. I mean, quite honestly, we haven't talked about the bloated state government, but I think we can get rid of 5,000 people and not even know it. Along with another several hundred political appointees. Anything that we can do to reduce the size of state government and reduce the involvement of state government in our lives, I think we need to engage with.
Actually, there's a lot of things that we can get rid of, so let me just go from a different perspective. There are a number of reports that are sent to Santa Fe every year by businesses and other entities. Nobody ever looks at the reports. They get a check, but nobody looks. If you have a compliance report and nobody reads it, you probably don't need to do it. So that's a very basic way to start. The next thing, let's look at taxes. Our tax system has been obliterated over the last 8 years. We no longer have a tax policy. Taxes should be, from a policy perspective, low, broad, fair, equitable, easy to administer, easy to understand. They no longer are that way in this state. But one of the things that I am going to pursue is a limit on how much time a small business, say a business under $5 million, producing under $5 million, how much time they spend filing their taxes. And I think 8 hours and a quarter is probably a good measure. So I believe in quantifying and measuring to make sure that what we're doing makes some sense. Now I do want to kind of step where Pete was going, because some of this just makes me just a little crazy. So let's talk about the New Mexico Environment Department. They make me really mad a lot. And one of the things that they have done is, this is too much regulation. Why would the New Mexico Environment Department be interested or sticking its nose in a USDA loan program for rural water companies? That's a financial instrument, and yet they have done that. You know, and so there is an appropriateness. So let's talk about some regulations. And let me give you a real hot one. Arsenic. Pete hit it right on the head. You know, in our state, we have probably more active arsenic because of our volcanic mountains, naturally occurring. Anybody know how many people died in this state from arsenic poisoning? Anybody who's gotten sick? Excessive measurement without any positive results on your health.
Okay, we're starting to get towards the end here, so the next question is going to be the 10th Amendment one. This lady's got a question, and then Eldon's got a question, and then we'll see where we are in the time frame.
Let me follow up on the 10th Amendment issue. And I'll just take you back a little bit in time. When I, many years ago, was in law school, the first project I did was to look at, on behalf of the Association of Cities, could they push back on federal legislation using the 10th Amendment, which is pretty similar to states pushing back. Cities also have sometimes raised that same argument, saying this is excessive federal action. We have seen over the last, that was quite a while ago, 27 or so years ago. Since then, we have seen just the continued advance of the federal government in all aspects of life, really with a very limited constitutional basis. Usually it's the Interstate Commerce Clause is the sole basis that the federal government uses to regulate virtually anything. And to fight back on that, states need to stand up either individually or in association with other states and contest federal legislation on the grounds that it does not have an interstate impact. It is essentially the federal government making state policy. And as your governor, I will vigorously try to draw that distinction, try to push back on that trend that basically says we just jump right over the 10th Amendment when there's federal legislation. All we do is see if there's a consensus or not. We don't care about your state. We, as collectively, as the federal government, will tell your state what's best. We, as a collective federal legislation, will tell your state or your city or your county what to do. I will push back on that.
I'm going to put most of my time back in the pot here because I already talked about my belief and sort of the history of the increasing federal encroachment onto our states' rights. I firmly believe that governors have the ability to go and say no to the federal government. What we also need is we need a stronger congressional delegation, which we do not have in this state right now. We lost every Republican seat that we had. So I'm confident that this year we will get people like Steve Pierce in office, we will get people like John Barella up in the 1st Congressional District in office, and I'm hopeful that we can get someone up in northern New Mexico. Because if we don't have a strong congressional delegation, we don't have as strong of a voice as we should. And I will continue to work in my campaign, and even after this campaign is over, to make sure we elect more conservative, more states' rights-oriented individuals to our government.
A governor has a couple of primary duties. The first one is to assure the safety and welfare of the citizens of the state. The part that is often overlooked is the other responsibility, and that is to make sure there is adequate food supply within your own state. That is a really big question, and our food is being driven out of our state, and our agricultural communities are being affected. So understand these two go in a pair, and so we need to think about those two things. Second thing is, we talked about it already, the Medicare-Medicaid match. We have a lot of strings with the federal government. Are you ready? Are you ready to start letting go of some of those ties? I am. Every time we get the 3-to-1 Medicare-Medicaid match, I know we couldn't do better if we devised our own system. What about Title I, Title IV, and Title IX dollars for our education system? With that comes strings. What about the race to the top and the ARA money? There are a lot of strings. So what are you willing to do? Because you know it's going to be the citizens. I'm telling you what I'm willing to do. I am willing to say we are probably going to be better off looking at and standing on our own 2 feet. This is not going to be a fast process. But so I will start, once I make sure you are safe and that there is adequate food, we are going to secure the border. We are also probably going to stand against the health care bill. And I am willing to stand against the federal government. And here's what I know about the federal government. You know, they may come and get me. It's probably going to take them 18 months. That's okay.
You probably already answered this question, but are all 3 of you willing to sue the government based on our constitutional rights that have been affected with the health care? Number 1. Number 2, will you enact voter ID?
Yes and yes.
Okay. Yes and yes.
Same.
Now we're going to get the last question.
You touched on shrinking state government, or referring to things 5,000. How long will it take you to reduce the size of this government?
It's actually not arbitrary. Janice actually probably has some other numbers. I think the current increase in state employees is somewhere around 5,000 people in the last 7.5 years. But on top of that, we have 2.5 to 3.5 times the number of political appointments. And on top of that, we have a new classification of appointments which Bill Richardson and Diane Nash have created, which is called temporary. So the temporary can go like that. The political appointments I've committed to already terminating all those paid political jobs. And the general consensus is that you can lose upwards of 5,000 people over about 2 years through attrition. Because once you're in sort of a tenured state job, you kind of have that job until you decide to leave it or retire. So, you know, I would put a freeze on hiring, put a freeze on state political appointments. I've committed to returning political appointments back to 2003 levels. In the last year of Gary Johnson's term, we had 167 political appointments. We ought to be able to run our government with that many or fewer. The amount of money that we will save by doing this is somewhere in the range of $300 million a year, which is phenomenal. But on top of that, what we have to do is we have to rejigger our state retirement system, which is now $22 billion in the hole. $22 billion. You could retire at 45 and get 80% of your salary plus health care for the rest of your life. And something is wrong with that system, and I will change that system.
Numbers. During the last special session, here's what I know. We looked at the budget. There were 4,329 vacancies. Of that, at least 3,000 were funded. There are no bodies in them. She paid for it. So first and foremost, if there's an FTE, there needs to be a body. Very simple. The truth is with that number, right now, government is already getting smaller. So what about the next step? And you know, there are economies of scale. There's technology that can make us better. But there are also places where you need to grow government a little bit. So let me give you an example. Workforce Solutions, that's also known as the Labor Department. That is the one department that right now is under attack. There are a lot of people looking for benefits that we promised in unemployment. It has 156 vacancies. What kind of management is that? We have a couple of other places where there are serious problems. And so just to say we're going to use a great one broad brush stroke to fix this, no. The juvenile justice part of CYFD is really in trouble, and I think we may have to grow there. Now, are there other places that can be pulled back? In fact, I was just talking with somebody in the Department of Agriculture. The Organic Food Commission, as near as I can tell, has never been funded. So what are we going to do with that? And I'm not suggesting that we actually do anything there. There's a whole raft of boards and commissions that are merely observe and report. Well, quite frankly, if you're an observe and report board, that means that once a year you do a glossy publication. The volunteer groups can do that. So there are lots of ways to slice this.
Let me try to be a little succinct. I would say within 2 years we will be down 5,000 employees. And then at that point, when we hire new state employees, which we will need to eventually, we will need to set up a new compensation package for state employees. So we're talking 24 months to get down close to where we should be, and then let those employees retire. If they have agreements, they get the benefit of those. Let them keep working, let them move out of the state, and the new class of state employees are going to get benefits that are realistic in light of the economy of the state, in light of what the private sector pays, in light of what other people have to put in to acquire retirement benefits, to acquire health care benefits. And that's how I see not just New Mexico, but the future of other state governments running in this in the future economy that we have in the United States. We don't have the luxury of providing these kinds of benefits to any additional employees that come into state government. And we don't want to encourage that kind of employment as some goal for people. We want people to look for private sector jobs, to compete with private sector jobs, and we want state government to be small and limited.
closing statement time. Janice, you get to start, Pete, and then Doug. And 2 minutes for your closing time. And I'm sorry, Doug, I know you got...
No, it's okay, we're fine.
You're good?
No, we're fine.
Okay.
I'm just freezing.
I'm freezing too. Thank you so much for sitting right here to have this discussion. You know, I believe that our government is only a portion of what makes New Mexico great. You're what makes New Mexico great. If you want the government to be helpful, you have to be part of it. I am an advocate of open government. I'm an advocate for open public discussion because you know what? The issues we're facing with, every single one that you brought up is complex. It's not as simple as any one of us sitting in Santa Fe and say, oh, those folks down in Doñana County, they'll just love it if I do this to them. You know what? It just doesn't work anymore. As your governor, just as I have done as a legislator, I have made sure that there are constituents meetings, there is an open dialogue on a regular basis. That is the only way that we are going to create policy that we all agree on. Because let me tell you what, the best thing about running for governor right now, we're broke. Did I mention that? We're broke. And because we are broke, we have this unique opportunity to, as a state, decide what is important to do, because we cannot do everything. That dialogue I want to have, and I want to lead us in that direction because I have a vision, just like everybody else has for this state, but that vision is a way for our children to succeed, an economy that has been changed. I believe we should be the largest energy exporters in the nation. We're going to have a conversation. We do not have the infrastructure to accomplish that. We don't have the electrical grid. Why not? It's partly because your government failed to make proactive decisions that considered what you were doing. And that goes likewise for communication. When you have a big state, it makes sense to be able to communicate. When we have an economy like that, businesses will flourish because they will be able to compete with other states because the startups will be less expensive. I'd like to be your governor. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I would like to ask for your support in this primary. It's coming up June 1st. I'm going to try to be quick in this closing. I'm going to mention about 7 aspects of state government, and they're directly in contrast to the state government we have now. This, if I'm your governor, this is the kind of government and the kind of governor you will have elected. You will have an honest state government. And you can, in your own mind, put the opposite to each one of these. You will have a small state government. You will have a limited state government. You will have an efficient state government. You will have a business-friendly state government. And you will have a governor who will pursue the interest of New Mexicans. So I don't think I need to say the opposite, but for every single one of those, the government, state government, and governor you have now is exactly the opposite of where I think the state should be going. Thank you.
I'm going to use the rest of your time. Thank you all for spending the time and enduring, what we are going through. This has been an adventure the last 10 months. I got into this race last July, really for a simple set of reasons. And the most important of those is I actually have a vision for this state, and a vision for this state that is positive. We know what the problems are. We know that we are broke. We know that government is broken. We know that state government is failing our children in education, failing our small businesses that create jobs, and I think failing our families. We know these things. But I believe that with your involvement, and certainly with the involvement of all the people in this state who become so active in the last 10 to 12 months, that we can educate our children, We can do a better job and not be 50th in the nation any longer. We can do things like vouchers. We can implement things like term limits. We can help small businesses grow and not spend all of our energy trying to help large businesses come to New Mexico. You know, New Mexico is an amazing, amazing state with probably more resources than any state in the lower 48. And yet we manage to squander those resources year after year. I'm tired of listening to people who get involved in politics talk about how we're no longer going to be at the bottom of everything that's good and at the top of everything that's bad. We've heard it enough. And I've had enough of that. And so I commit to you, as we head into the primary and then head into the general election, that this race is winnable. This race is winnable by a Republican. And the kind of Republican that we generally elect is a maverick. It's an outsider who has not been involved in politics. You know, Ronald Reagan said it best when he said, much is asked of those who are in public office, but much more is asked of those who are doing the choosing. And all of you today, and all of your friends, and all of the people who are active in politics around New Mexico right now are the ones who are doing the choosing. And so I applaud you for getting out of your chairs, stop screaming at the TV, and getting engaged in this campaign. I have been working my tail off for almost a year, and I commit to you, I will work my tail off for the next 8 with your support. Thank you, and God bless you.
Again, for all of the candidates. Okay, before we break here, we've got another candidate to listen to. I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and if you're having conversations with any of the candidates,